Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is the almost ready Jennifer Woolman.
I'm ready. I
Jennifer,
just
say
forgot
hi.
I hadn't put my headphones on. I'm like, why does he sound so different?
I just love the face of panic in your face when you realize, oh, I don't have my what? What's going on? I don't have my earphones on. I love it. By the way, there's nothing coming in or out of these earphones. We just do it for the look. We have no idea why we're wearing earphones.
Because they look cool. They make us look kind of like
DJs. They make us look like podcasters. You know, there you go. So that's what it is.
I thought it was the mics that made us look
perhaps.
like
Perhaps. I think it's a combination of the two. Although I think we need to reconfigure the studio for sure.
No more cafecito.
No more cafecito for me. Jennifer has given me a shot of espresso, so she feels that I'm
low energy.
I'm a little much. Anyhow, thank you guys for joining us on this episode. One of the things that we rejoice in is being able to highlight the many wonderful municipalities that are within South Florida. And one of them, very centrally located, is the City Beautiful, as it is known, the city of Coral Gables. And we recently went to a presentation, a city spotlight that was made by the Miami Association of Realtors on Coral Gables, where we got the opportunity to listen to Mayor Vince Lago and Commissioner Lara on everything that is happening in the city, its growth, its future, kind of like its North Star. And we got a lot of great information on it. And of course, we thought that we would have a bit of a comprehensive look at what's happening on the commercial market in Coral Gables. I know, Jennifer, you've done a lot of, tenant rep and other kind of business in the city of Coral Gables. I always love the story of you working with a group that originally wanted to be in downtown Miami, if I'm not mistaken, or other parts of town.
They wanted to be on Brickell. Yeah.
No, they wanted to be on Brickell. And then you did this entire study to show them that really the place that made the most sense for them based on where their employees lived, based on the level of work that they were doing, proximity to everything, how centrally located it is, and the experience that they wanted to have, right? And the amenities surrounding it was Coral Gables. So,
correct, and they got a beautiful building with the Agave Group, where FIFA is now also in the building next door.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, as I'm looking at here, and I kind of did a breakdown from Q2 and Q3 of this year on what's been happening in the different sectors in Coral Gables. And this is one of the most active suburban office markets with rents that are holding steady, heavy deal flow, very limited Class A, which was something that the mayor mentioned. And even with those things, attracting a lot of, to your point, like FIFA and a lot of big headquarters into Miami-Dade County.
Okay, so what did you break down?
So look, vacancy is low. The average vacancy there on Q2 for the Coral Gables whole market was 16.6. That number is below 0.6 when it comes to A-class office. So that tells you the disparity, right? So this is one of those examples that we always talk about, that one stat doesn't give you the entire picture, correct, right? Because they're doing an amalgam of all classes of office. But the reality is, Office A is just really killing it. I mean, to have a less than a 0.6 on a vacancy factor on office building is incredible. They just can't build enough. Average rents are $56 overall. Again, that's average. We've seen numbers that are higher and, of course, numbers that are lower. about 314,000 square feet year to date through quarter two that were leased in Coral Gables. And Coral Gables and Airport West together lead the suburban deal activity. So there is a huge amount of activity. You have some notable, and I want you to add to this, but I know that Bacardi relocated to 3011 Ponce de Leon, 130,000 square feet, created a one-time Class B give back at 2701 South Lejeune. City National Bank pre-leased 57% of that space to move in is expected by year end. So there's a lot of moving parts. Yeah,
and there's still a lot of development and a lot of activity. So the plaza, right. The plaza is super active. They've done a lot of engagements in their community, in their open park center. So there's a lot of engagement with the community and their retail spaces. Yeah. I believe all of their F&B downstairs has been, I'm trying to think, it's all been leased. I'm thinking the last one, I think it's already been built out. One of our favorites there. Sandwich with the first Ventanita in Coral Gables. Yeah. And then the new Alan Morris project, Ponce Park. They're going to have over 22,000 square feet of commercial space. So that's another development. I mean, just everywhere you go in Coral Gables, you're seeing the cranes and the buildings going up. There's more multifamily going up. And I loved one of the things with all of this building. One of the issues with Coral Gables has always been the permitting process and what a pain it is to deal with the city, and that really rankled the mayor and the commission. So they hired 20 new zoning and building people for their building department because he says he wants to provide like the Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Ferrari experience in permitting, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they do have an architectural board and they do have a historic board. So they have some components of permitting that other cities don't have. But if I were the city of Coral Gables, I would want that too, because part of what makes Coral Gables so special is the fact that the bulk of it, at least the heart of it, was built in 1925 under the vision of George Merrick, who, put all his money into this and died broke so that we can have this beautiful community. Yeah. So that part is a hassle to deal with, and it could add an extra layer, but it's also what keeps the values and prices up. And so I think if they go ahead and are able to get more efficiencies into the whole process, and hiring more staff on to do it. We also spoke last episode with Joel Moda from Weston, and found out that the city of Weston is trying to promote third-party permitting on a statewide level, or at least offer it to other cities, and that can help as well. But I think the fact that this commission is so hands-on. So if you do have a massive problem with your permitting and you just can't get it to move and you can't get an answer,
go visit the mayor.
Go visit the mayor or the commissioners. They hold office hours and they will physically and literally walk you down to permitting to go see what the holdup and what the issue is, because sometimes it might just be communication. And so I thought that was
absolutely
really good.
And it's really interesting because it's very important for a city to maintain its identity and to maintain the amenities and the factors that really attracted the residents to that city, right? And what has made the city successful. That doesn't take away from finding ways to be more efficient in the way that things are processed. Right. And to your point about the Weston commentary is, you have a third party that is processing the permits. They're processing it faster. They only get compensated once the permit is processed. That doesn't mean when the permit is approved. It just means that it's processed, and it's processed efficiently, it's processed quickly, so that the resident has the information as soon as possible to be able to really move forward with their project. One of the things that you reminded me is I remember hearing from Bob Graham many years ago. Of course, he's since passed, may he rest in peace, and speak about when they were developing Miami Lakes, all of the other municipalities that were also doing new developments, they would basically, in order to compete, would say, well, if you go to Miami Lakes, you're going to pay for a lot of trees and a lot of lakes. Right, because Miami Lakes was developed with this idea of they wanted to build almost like a Venetian style, but without, instead of the canals, they would have the lakes, and they would have the parks and the trees. So the huge investment in that, right, at the time, people were knocking it, that were competing against them, to say, well, you're going to go and you're going to pay for a lot of trees, and you're going to pay for all this landscape, and you're going to pay for all these things. But the reality is that look at where that city is now. Right. And it has a very distinct look, a very distinct feel, and people that live there love it. Right. And property values not only hold strong, but they continue to go up. Correct. Right. And it's, and it's a combination of all those factors. So that becomes important. One of the things that I realized that was not discussed during the meeting was, there's a lot of talk about Miracle Mile, whether the mile is really, as active as it could be. There's been a lot of changes, but I mean, when you look at it from a commercial real estate perspective, vacancy there is also below 1%. Average rent is about $53. Definitely, I've seen those numbers to be, much higher than that. And so that's an interesting dynamic. I mean, were you surprised that there wasn't a conversation about Miracle Mile?
A little bit,
Yeah.
In the panel there wasn't, but afterwards there was. And I thought it was interesting because you and I had a conversation with Nina Yefimova, and she's a retail leasing agent, and she does a lot of retail. And she was saying, the problem with Miracle Mile is the lack of parking. And then we got in a discussion to say, well, there is no lack of parking. There's a lack of education, because yes, if you drive along Miracle Mile, you see, it's just the parallel parking, right? So it looks like, in front of every store, you might have one or two spaces. Right. And then in front of every segment, there's a crosswalk. So it doesn't look like you can fit a lot of cars. Yeah. But the education problem is the fact that immediately behind most of the strip that is Miracle Mile, there are covered parking garages. Right. With paseos that you walk through, totally covered paseos that you walk through to get you connected, which even if there's parking in front of where I'm going, I go around and I park behind because it's covered parking. It's the same, it's city parking. So whether you pay, on your app there or at the city parking, you're paying the same dollar per hour. Right. And your car is covered. It doesn't get hot. You don't get wet walking to and from it. So it was interesting that the perception is that there's no parking when there is parking around. The other issue with Miracle Mile is, what you and I have discussed before on this podcast and with anybody who will listen, right, is when the landlords and buyers of real estate that has been successful, especially with retail, and I consider what happened on Lincoln Road and what's happening on Miracle Mile very, very similar, is that what made those walkable retail centers so charming was that they weren't for the tourist, right? Only they were for the tourist, but it was a place that people who live here, residents, want to go. And if I wanted to go to Miami Beach and leave my little Pinecrest cocoon, I could go to Miami Beach, go to Lincoln Road, and still have a community flavor. Yep. And then, buyers came in, and a lot of it was private equity. They come in, they buy, they drive the prices up, and then all of a sudden, the tenants who made the place super, super cool can't afford to be there. And a lot of people that I have mentioned this to argue, especially some of the commercial brokers, well, you always need an anchor, and there will always be a mix of anchors and mom and pops. But on Lincoln Road, almost everything became an anchor. I mean, you had Apple, you had Zada, you had all of these stores that I can find anywhere in any mall, and it's vanilla. And I am not going to leave my Pinecrest cocoon to go to Miami Beach to walk Lincoln Road if it's exactly the same people that are at Dadeland Mall. Right. So, and I think that's kind of not quite what happened on Miracle Mile, because Miracle Mile has done a good job of keeping more of the independents and small and retails, but their rents have gone up, right? The price that they pay, no doubt, between the price per square foot and the triple nets are really, really high. And unfortunately, we're seeing not just on Miracle Mile, but in other parts of downtown Coral Gables, some really cool companies and restaurants restaurants and F&B concepts that were always packed, always popular, going out of business, not because their business model didn't work, but because they're being priced out of the market.
It also feels like every new product, whether it's office or retail, gets absorbed, very quickly, especially street retail on Miracle Mile. And, two things to note is that every, the office component of the mixed-use development of the plaza is 100% leased,
Yes.
which is, just unbelievable and incredible. Most of their F&B is already completed. I know that there's that development or that concept by Fratelli's that is still getting finished.
Still getting built out.
Still getting built out. Daniel's Miami Steakhouse, which we have to go, partner. We have to check it out.
100%.
Open in the former Friola space.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. And to your point about Miracle Mile, one of the biggest trades for about $28.5 million happened at 57 to 67 Miracle Mile, about 68,000 square feet of retail that sold for $437 a square foot in Q2, which is, very solid pricing for Gables, high visibility, street retail.
Agreed. And I think, one of the things that we talk about a lot is how the community is the amenity. And so much of what Coral Gables does, they, during the cooler months, they try to engage their public open spaces, even if they're really, really small, with musical symphonies, or in the plaza, which is much bigger. They do an Easter hunt and, have the Easter bunny there. But one of the things that...
And I always find that during Christmas time when they this park that is right at the center of traffic, right? Yeah. But the fact, I always find that is probably one of the best uses of a very small park, right? But it just is so attractive, and people love to come with their young families.
You're talking about the one on Ponce, or where
they put the one on Ponce, where they put the Christmas, and so it's always very, very, very lively, and really beautiful to be around there during the holidays.
And I think really one of the things that he said that is an amenity, and that Joelle also pointed out in Weston, was the parks. So the mayor is really, really keen on keeping George Merrick's vision of having lots of parks and plazas and open space, no matter how dense the area gets. And so, they've noticed that in the Central Business District, there aren't a ton of parks and plazas and open space. There are a handful of them, but so now they're trying to make it and encourage that there's more, more open space, more of these little parklets, I guess they'd be called parklets and plazas, to engage and open and get people outside and walking. And I think that's a big plus for the city. But for a developer, if you're a developer, it's going to be an issue maybe for you, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to pay dividends to the project and to the city. And to the point, property values rise if you reinvest in the community, and this is a way to reinvest in the community.
No, for sure. And I thought it was interesting, that whole concept of them, taking over these pieces of land and turning it into parks. And I know we had a podcast recently about, the changes in the healthcare industry and medical use for commercial real estate. And part of it is now you have these smaller centers that provide that service. I like that concept of the idea that instead of just having one big park, that you have these little parks spread out throughout the city, so that it becomes a really unique proposition. Listen, it becomes a part of your consideration too when you're buying real estate, whether you're buying residential for yourself, but having that proximity, be able to walk to a park, it's a big deal when you make those decisions.
And in terms of proximity and connectivity, they've done a really good job, because they are in the heart of the city, and there are traffic issues like there are everywhere in Miami-Dade County. They have the trolley system to help get you to the Metro Rail. But the client that I ended up putting in that Agave building on Alhambra was one of the things that they said like a year or two later, because they moved a significant portion of their staff down here from New York. I said, so, how's it going? How are your people feeling? What do you guys think? Do you feel like it was a positive move? they said that the number one thing that changed their quality of life was how short of a time it took them to get from their office to the airport. Because this company did international sales, so they're constantly flying to South America, Europe, and the Caribbean. And they said when they were centered in New York, in Manhattan, regardless of what airport they had to go to, it would take them a significant amount of time. But in 20 minutes, they catch a flight, they get off the plane, in 20 minutes, they're at the office, or vice versa. They're at the office, they have to go catch their flight. It wasn't a whole day affair. They could leave within, a couple of hours or an hour and make the flight.
And be good to go. Yeah, those things are important. Now, you mentioned some of the development pipeline. You mentioned the Alan Morris, Ponce Park residences. It hasn't broken ground. I believe it breaks ground, fourth quarter of this year. And they expect it'll finish by late 2027. 11 stories, 58 units, 22 square feet of retail, keeping that Merrick Park, corridor churning. There seems to be a lot of momentum for this Merrick Park district as well. But other than that,
I love Merrick Park. I gotta say, I love Merrick Park. It's when I don't like shopping center, it's just shopping malls, I should say, or that kind of thing. I like being outside. And Merrick Park is just gorgeous. Not only have they done an amazing job curating that place, but did you know there's a movie theater there? Most people don't even know there's a movie theater on the third floor.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because during Christmas, right before Christmas, we my wife and I went to buy something for our oldest, and we parked. Again, you're walking in there, it doesn't feel like a mall. There is a beautiful blend of the outside with the inside, and beautifully manicured. It really is an experience. It's so inviting that once we bought what we went straight to the store to buy what we wanted to buy. I said, let's just walk around, maybe we'll grab a coffee. And then I saw the movie theater. I'm like, I didn't even know there was a movie theater here. This is great.
It's a movie theater with a bar and full restaurant service, by the way, so I don't have to take my own cocktails to the movies anymore. But they've done a great job, to my point before, with what we were saying about some of these places.
So what you're saying is, when we have the premiere of the Between Two Chairs movie, we're going to probably do it there?
Yeah.
I love your face.
So, this, they have a Williams-Sonoma. Obviously, their anchors they have Neiman Marcus and Nordstrom's. So they have a Lululemon. So they do have some of the nationals, but then they have a beautiful mix of smaller designers and locals and restaurants and everything else. So it's a great place to hang out.
It's been very well curated, and that's, and it's very intentional. And that's a big part. And sometimes what people don't understand is, when these are the kind of projects that cities invite, because they know there's going to be a dialogue, but there is intentionality in the way that you're going to develop it. And I'm sure that there were roadblocks, right? The city says, no, I want it this way, I want it that way. And,
a lot of NIMBYism.
Right. But at the same time, there is, when you get to a compromise, if you look at that project as a compromise, right, it's a beautiful compromise. It's great, It's great for the neighborhood. It enhances. It doesn't take away. It reminded me of one thing that I found really interesting. You and I, my only time in San Diego was for a conference, and one of the things that I found really interesting is we were doing an event at the San Diego Padres ball field, and we're walking and in this urban environment, and almost seemingly out of nowhere, here is the park. And I thought that, wow, what an incredible job the city did in being able to create this experience here in an urban center, and making it feel like it had always been there, like it was part of the fabric, and that it wasn't an eyesore at all. It was actually enhancing. And, I thought, and year over year, it's voted as one of the most beautiful baseball parks in America. And I'm sure that was a result of a lot of wrestling with the zoning and planning departments to make sure that it met the high standards that they left for themselves. So we know that sometimes it is frustrating to process a permit through Coral Gables, but there is a science and an art to having high standards for your city.
And not only that, but so you've got great headquarters. You have consulates, you have retailers, you have it is a highly residentially dense area, right? In the downtown, or even within walking distance or a very short commute. And look, to have the plaza 100% leased is amazing. And the largest lease in Coral Gables this year was City National for 145,000 square feet, right? And this is at a time when the office market overall in the nation is still not doing so great. And in Miami, it's better than most. But then to your point of the, being hyper-local market expert,
no doubt.
Here you've got Coral Gables, which is totally different. Don't come into some of these Class A buildings in the Gables and think that you're going to lowball a rental because office, vacancy is at 15%.
That's right. Correct. So. And I'll tell you, it's really interesting, Jennifer, because where I find that to be the case is when we're at a national conference or we're having a debate about, because office nationwide is suffering, right? And there is this conversation about, can the federal government provide a tax incentive for the redevelopment, the repurposing of these office spaces into, multifamily, into something else, and always the conversation is that the numbers just don't pencil out in order to do that. The incentive would have to be very, very significant. But when we're having those conversations, I look around commercial brokers from South Florida, they almost like, they lose interest because they know that's not our market. We don't have that problem.
Right.
That's not an issue that is, on our local market. We're having the opposite. We have to build more Class A. We just don't have the supply to take care of the demand for that product.
Well, and to that point, so we had the $76 million acquisition of the Columbus Center, right? That was 2 office buildings,
That's
right? So there again is the office. And then in Coral Gables, commercial sales overall jumped 130 to 138 million. Again, to your point, national news, Florida news, county news, and then city news. And those can be 4 completely different stories and pictures.
Yeah.
So on that note, have we beat that horse enough?
We have. And what we want to say is one of the reasons why we like to do these, number one, is because we really enjoy these city spotlights, because you get to have the stakeholders in one room, and you have a Q&A, and you kind of get a better sense of what's going on. And this is a big part of what you need in order to make a sound investment in real estate. Is you got to know what's happening in the place that you're investing in, right? And understand not only what is the long-term view, what kind of projects are coming along, but I find more importantly to understand the mindset of those that are going to make decisions that can potentially positively or negatively impact your investment in the long term. So,
and the last thing that I wanted to end with, because you and I talk about this a lot too, is you and I just talk a lot.
I know, we got to stop talking.
Is what the mayor said when somebody said, well, how can we find out what's going on? And in a room full of agents that live and or work in Coral Gables, he said, how many of you serve on a council or committee? And I think, there were 200 and something people there.
Right.
And one person raised her hand.
Right.
So shame on us as brokers. We need to be more involved in the cities where we live and work, so we can have our pulse on what's going on with where we live and work. And, saying, how do I find out? And you either find out through the paper or a Facebook post or LinkedIn or whatever isn't the same as being on a council or a committee in your city and having input on what's going on in that city. So there's my soapbox comment for the day.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us on another episode of Between Two Chairs. I would like to invite you that if there is a municipality that you would like us to highlight, we would love to do that for you in an upcoming episode. So please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, and let us know how we can create that content for you. All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.